Hello, everyone, and welcome to the American Council on Exercise live webinars continuing education series. My name is Jackie Crawford, and I am excited to be your host today for another great live webinar. If you are ready to get started, let's go for today's course, a movement-based approach to strength training. Thank you so much for joining us for this course. I will be joined by two titans of the industry joining us from the Institute of Motion. I'm excited to welcome in first Derrick Price. Derrick, come on in.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us. Thanks for the warm welcome, Jackie. Yeah, good morning or good afternoon to some.
Get started. Thanks for joining us. I'm just going to go ahead and welcome in our next presenter here. You know him pretty well. Let's bring in Michol. Michol Dalcourt, thanks for joining us as well.
Yeah, Jackie, just a warm welcome to you. Thanks to Devin and Stephanie and the whole team at ACE, and obviously all the participants that are jumping on. Good morning or good afternoon from wherever you are.
Yes, we have people joining us from around the globe. Feel free to type in where you are joining us from into your question box, and we'll take a look at those. Derrick and Michol, I'm going to go ahead and let you guys take it away here and talk to us about a movement-based approach to strength training. Let's get started.
All right, sounds great. I'm going to kick us off by first kind of going through these learning objectives, and then we'll describe the ebb and flow of today's webinar. So what we're looking to do first is we'll kind of really define and understand the need for movement-based strength training. We'll talk about three unique forms of movement-based strength training. So think of movement-based strength training as the umbrella, and then there's kind of these sub-themes that we're going to describe and uncover in today's webinar. We're going to go over a variety of different exercises that fit within these training themes. And the idea is really for today is to inspire our thinking and how we can start to program a specific form of strength training that many people that we work with may need. And then we're going to identify how these unique forms of strength can be incorporated within the ACE IFT model. So let's build some context first around the idea of movement-based strength training. And so as you can see in this slide here, I think what is a good place to start is, understanding how we traditionally look at building a strength program. A lot of times we focus on the idea of, programming strength around muscles. And that's not a wrong approach. But it's certainly not the only way in which we can approach our thinking in terms of how we can enhance our clients in terms of their ability to be stronger. And so when we talk about the idea versus muscle and movement, a muscle approach, as we all know, is today's chest day or today's leg day or whatever combination of muscles we're looking to enhance. And that's usually how we go about prescribing exercises from a strength training approach. And so typically the exercises we select, we're trying to isolate stress into these specific muscles or regions of the body. And again, that's not a wrong approach. It is a approach, and it's a very viable one, especially for those who need enhancement into specific tissues. Now, the other end of this spectrum, the idea of movement-based strength, we define that as whole body integrated, motor task specific. And so think of, instead of today I'm training legs, think of perhaps, a farmer, they're going to do the chore of building a fence, or they're going to go bale hay, or they're going to, take a shovel and they're going to shovel a bunch of dirt. That is a whole body approach to a given task. And so what we'll explore here in the next so many slides is more of a whole body task-driven approach to how we select exercises, and with the idea of enhancing the body as a whole versus just specific muscles. Because what we got to recognize is that strength isn't only a contribution of muscles. That is only one component of it. We need to have an intelligent nervous system, and we need to have a strong and resilient connective tissue system, i.e. our fascia, our ligaments and tendons. Most soft tissue injuries are a result of our soft tissues breaking down. So we need all of these structures and components of our body to be strong. And a movement-based approach is going to allow us to do that. And so when we program, if let's say that was a decision tree we're navigating, so if you're thinking about, okay, I'm going to build a strength program for my client, and on a particular session, we're going to go muscle. And let's say you pick, I don't know, legs. From that perspective, you can then say, all right, well, how are we going to enhance the leg musculature? Is it going to be maximal efforts? Is it going to be sub-max? Are we going to try to improve their endurance, or are we going to try to improve growth or muscle hypertrophy? And then based off of that, that starts to drive our programming logic in terms of the sets and the reps, the rest range, the intensities, etc. So that's how we've traditionally gone about it. What we want to explore now is more the movement-based side. So how do you go about, if the goal of today wasn't more movement or wasn't muscle, but rather movement, well, what are the considerations I would want to make when developing somebody's program? So what we're going to do is walk through 3 different types of strength that reside underneath the umbrella of movement-based strength training. Those 3 are odd position strength, dead strength, and agile strength. And what we're going to do is define each of these terms and then share with you some different exercises really to inspire your thinking in terms of the types of exercises you can select within each of these categories. And then we'll finish this off with going over some case studies and see how this can be embedded within a program. So Michol, I'm going to kick it off to you. If you can do us a huge favor and walk us through this idea of odd position strength, and I'll kick myself out here for a little bit.
Yeah, Derrick, thanks so much. And to tee off on what DP or Derrick was saying is, what we do is we want to build a context for the idea of muscle-based versus movement-based approaches. And I think as of a respectful way to look at the time allotted today, to give you an overall context to perhaps flavor your thinking in a certain way, we want to create kind of that narrative where if we look at certain physiological aspects of our system, whether it's the nervous system, whether it's the joints themselves, whether it's the musculature of the body, they respond uniquely to these ideas of movement-based strength. And the analogy that Derrick took us through was to use the idea of a farmer. So if we look at farm kid strength, and we look at chores on the farm, and we look at the loading parameters and the tasks that they have to do on the farm, what we look at and what we start to realize is that it's not a singular focus of a certain region of the body, but rather an overall view of using the body as a body to get the task done. So we're digging a trench, let's say we're pounding posts into the ground. These are all body endeavors. And in a lot of cases, they require a loading mechanism that is asynchronous. So it's asymmetrical. I'm loading one side of the body more than the other, perhaps. It's an unequal load to the body. I'm moving mass either away from my midline or away from my body in general. And so these define what we would call odd position strength. They're movement-based, but they're uncommon positions where our body has to accommodate it in a way that can create a result. And so if we advance one slide, what we're going to take a look at is some examples of novice, intermediate, and advanced exercises. Now, again, in the time allotted, what we don't want to do necessarily is speak to the techniques of each of these, but I want to give you an idea of what we're looking at as a relative context for these things so that we can understand why we might apply them. And then for the specific techniques, you can revisit these videos. We'll give you links on where to access these videos. But in this first particular video, what you see John doing is a movement-based approach where he's in a pre-position, his hands are above his head, and he's walking forward and back. His spine is going to be remaining tall, but his legs, his pelvis, and his core have to facilitate 2 things. They've got to facilitate stability at the same time as mobility or movement. So in this kind of more generalized sagittal motion, he's got to organize his nervous system, his skeletal system, i.e. his joints, and his muscular system, particularly at the hips and core, in order for him to successfully navigate this task of stepping forward and back. So this would be a beginner version of a movement strength profile. Another example, if we advance the slide, would be one where the individual is, again, typically in the sagittal plane. And what this individual is doing, if we advance the slide, what we want to do is we want to think about this idea of, can we actually regress the pattern? And if we can regress the pattern and start with a novel or kind of a base level movement pattern, it's going to be simple. So what you see John doing here is a very simple squat. And a lot of people might think, well, this is a generalized squat. And it is. What we're doing here is the odd position is now we're going into a lengthening reach with the hand. So for most individuals, this is pretty easily accessible in terms of motor command. And all we're doing now is we're adding a little bit of lengthening. So the tissues are being elongated as we're doing a basic squat pattern. So for many, we're getting long under load as opposed to short under load. And so this, again, is a very welcoming position to introduce movement-based or odd position strength. And as we matriculate this forward, it's going to get more uncommon in terms of familiarity. Some of the guidelines for kind of the neophyte, someone who's new to odd position strength, is we want to look at known postures. We don't want to get too uncommon at first. What we want to look at is these these known postures that are more highly stable. And what we want to do is we want to speak to this idea that they are primarily sagittally based. The rep range is going to be a little higher with lower loads. So the idea here is that we don't want to challenge load. We don't want to challenge the structure just yet. We want stability and we want some degree of commonality as we start to influence a little bit of odd positions, right? Forces that enter our body in odd positions. And the isometric holds would be 3 to 5 seconds. So that gives time for the nervous system to be able to accommodate these more unusual or uncommon positions. So that would be a novice approach. As we advance the slide, let's take a look at some examples that are more intermediate. And then after this, we'll look at some advanced principles. So if we look at the first slide here, we're going to look at an exercise that now is a little bit off the midline. It's a little bit less sagittally dominant and more frontal plane. So what we've got here is Jan. He's going to take a position where he's got a stance that's a little wider, and he's going to move his pelvis first. That's the first thing you're going to see. So his pelvis, by moving laterally, allows his hips and his spine to follow, because we don't want the spine moving without the entire body, because that puts extra load on the spine and the knees. If the hips can move first, it guides the knees and it guides the lower back so that they're not in an uncompromised situation. So we're teaching the body how to accommodate life, odd positions, in a way that protects the knees and protects the lower back, knowing that when we live our lives, we're going to move as a body in uncommon positions. And so what he's doing at his end range is he's pushing against the wall. So he's guiding the motion with his pelvis, and he's holding against the wall in an asymmetrical pattern. And that way it reinforces, again, an uncommon or unusual situation that his nervous system, that his joints, and that his muscles have to accommodate. So if we advance the slide, another example of what we might look at as an intermediate odd position strength profile would be an exercise, again, that we might think about that is a little bit more dynamic in nature. It's a little bit static, but it's a little bit more progressive in terms of the nervous system complexity of things. We're teaching the nervous system how to stabilize in a multiplanar way. So in this case, we've got Derrick Vandenbrink with his partner. So the gentleman in green is the coach, and the person wearing the gray shirt, that's Derrick, he is the client. And what he's doing is, think about this as what we call a warding pattern. So he is pushing against his partner. He's in a staggered stance, and he's in a situation where The stagger, he's got to accommodate the push. So his trainer is trying to push him off the midline. He's resisting that push, and he's going up and down. And so the goal, or the goal of the client, is to push him off the midline. What he wants to do is resist this in order to facilitate, a stability. So if we advance another slide, some of the guidelines around the intermediate aspect would be that we want to create more dynamic postures. They're teaching the nervous system how to stabilize multiplanar postures. And we typically want a rep range that's a little bit lower with more moderate load. So now we're increasing the load demand. And again, we want to hold that isometric contraction in a lot of them to teach stability and motor control. So let me quickly go to some advanced exercises, and then we're going to shift gears to another form of movement strength. So in this example of advanced exercises, what you might imagine is these are advanced. So what we have here is a lengthened position. John is now not only lengthening his tissues, but maintaining length in his tissues. And all the while, he's doing what's called a pivot lunge. So he's lunging forward and back while he's got to extend the arm and keep his arm extended. So that odd position is asymmetrically loaded. He's doing a much more complex motor task of a pivot lunge, and he's got to contract against a resistance at his end range. So this is much more complex. It's much more odd position based. Another example, if we switch slides, would be one in which we have, again, a more complex dynamic posture and movement that is more highly multiplanar. So in this case, we've got a load implement. In this case, it's a ViPR Pro, and we're going off the midline and we're going into a lengthened position. So the idea here is in the frontal plane, can I bring my pelvis over? Can my back and knees follow? And can I extend the body long so that I'm not moving through the spine? I'm not moving necessarily in odd ways through the knees, but it's an uncommon body loaded position. And so the guidelines around the advanced, if we move one slide ahead, would be that we are, again, increasing dynamic postures. We're increasing movement complexity. So now there's more neural challenge. There's more tissue challenge because I'm now going long under load. It's more multiplanar because that vector variability is going to allow the tissues to remodel like they would when we were on the farm. And now we're thinking about matriculating towards higher rep range, higher loads, lower rep range with higher loads so that it challenges the tissues in a greater way, much the same as any other protocol for strength. So what I'm going to do now is, if we think about the benefits, it's really about tensile strength, the idea of going long under load. And what that does is it reinforces the remodeling of skin, connective tissue, muscles under length, and that creates resiliency within the body. And the analogy is, farm kid versus city kid, the idea of going long under load and how strong a farm kid actually is. And there are a great many benefits to the nervous system. There are a great many benefits to skin, connective tissue, and the muscular system as well. So this is very much rooted in the body's ability to remodel effectively. So with that, I'd like to turn it over back to Derrick, and he's going to talk a little bit about dead strength.
Awesome. Thanks, Michol. Great job. So if we just summarize really quick, we have the idea of movement-based strength training, and we just covered one different type of movement-based strength. That was odd position strength. Now what we're going to do is navigate into this idea of dead strength, or the ability to produce force to overcome a resting inertia. So imagine if there's, let's say, an object that is on the ground and we need to overcome its resting inertia to then mobilize it. And so, what's pretty common is the idea of a deadlift. And I imagine if you think of a deadlift, you're thinking of a barbell on the ground, and then you're having to overcome the barbell's resting inertia to lift it up to your pelvis and then bring it back down. And that is a dead strength capability. Now, what we would say is there's probably lots of different ways in which we can enhance the body to deadlift different objects from different postures. And so we like this one as a great way for a lot of novice or beginning type clients who are learning the ability to be sensitive enough to be able to pick up a mass off the ground and do so efficiently. So in this case, David here is using a ViPR to deadlift. So it's resting on the ground. He's picking it up in a couple different positions. And what we like about this is for a lot of beginners, their ability to hinge at the hip is usually not that great. Yet it's still important to try to teach somebody and build the sensitivity through the nervous system to be able to overcome a mass's resting inertia. And so in this case, this allows the body to kind of sustain more of an upright posture and then practice deadlifting. As another example, this is a dumbbell exercise, and we're going to use a different body posture. So this particular body posture is a split stance. We call it a 1.5 stance. So you have the front foot, it's flat on the ground, the back foot, the heel is lifted, and most of the weight is kind of on this front lead leg. And so now, as more of an intermediate way to deadlift, is learning how to load the body asymmetrically, so on one side. In this case, we're doing an opposite arm, opposite leg lift. And our client's going to have to be able to deadlift this in a way to where the mass is right underneath, so having to hinge at the hip successfully. So this would be more of an intermediate way of deadlifting. And again, very different compared to how we might deadlift a traditional barbell. So again, not better or worse compared to barbell deadlifting. We would just say that oftentimes for a lot of people's life endeavors, that they're going to need an ability to deadlift things, deadlift a variety of different objects from a variety of different positions. And so that's going to be one of our challenges as we navigate this. This is a more advanced version of a deadlift. This is where we're going to take a barbell perhaps, but we're going to use a submaximal load, and we're going to go away from our midline. So going into a lateral lunge, Rebecca's then picking up the barbell and then having to bring it to her starting position. And so not only is the mass going up, it's also kind of moving through the frontal plane with her body as she does this. So we like this because, this is a blend of dead strength and odd position strength. So you kind of get a 2-for-1 with this type of action. So very beneficial, but we also have to respect our clients' capabilities. This is a more advanced exercise and something we would progress to over time. And so the idea is motor variability. So if you learn how to deadlift a barbell straight up and down and go really heavy, that's awesome. We would also encourage that we teach our clients, especially if they need to be dynamic in life or sport, that they learn how to deadlift objects in a variety of different ways. So these are a few different examples of deadlifting. This is now the concept of dead shifting. So dead shifting is similar to deadlifting, except that dead shifting, there is less of a vertical component to moving the mass and now more of a horizontal. So Johnny here is in a staggered stance. So again, we talked about learning how to deadlift or dead shift from different positions. We can do it from a kneeling. This is a half kneeling position. And you can see the trajectory of the medicine ball. It's starting on the ground, and yeah, it's going up, but it's also kind of coming across his body. So we would classify this now as a dead shift because, how often in life do we need to actually dead shift things, meaning that we need to pick up a mass, overcome its resting inertia, and now instead of driving it purely vertical against gravity, we need to learn how to drive it horizontal as well. Here's another example that's more on an intermediate level dead shift. And so we're using a ViPR Pro. Now, if you don't have a ViPR Pro, that's fine. Put a medicine ball there next to you. You're going to get some similar benefits. What's unique about the ViPR Pro, obviously, is the length and how we can manipulate and throw it around in different positions. So having it rest on the ground lateral to us requires Trevor here now to not only shift his pelvis laterally, but then have to now flex over that lead leg and then drive the mass horizontal through gravity. So he's not just picking it up, but he's traversing it through a field of gravity quite a bit. So this is what we would consider as a dead shift. And then again, because of this unique position that he's using, we would also classify it as an odd position strength. So a nice little 2-for-1 action here. So the key concept is that for every rep, you allow the mass to rest on the ground. So then you have to overcome its resting inertia. If you held on to the mass the entire time, you're kind of defeating the purpose of dead strength, because one of the things that we're trying to develop is a sensitivity to the nervous system to be able to pick up the mass when it's at rest. You know, when you pick up a luggage and you're not quite sure how heavy the luggage is, and all of a sudden your nervous system has to kick in really quick to generate more motor units to help you overcome that mass's resting inertia. It's kind of that same sensitivity that we're talking about here, and that's what helps to safeguard our back when we do these types of lifts and we practice it in the gym. It'll help us overcome, hopefully, in life settings. And then this last example here is a dead shift that's very advanced. And what we like about this, what's unique about it, is that the mass is resting not on the floor. And so if we want to elevate the floor, in this case, we're using a table, you know, how often do we sometimes have to put ourselves in these positions when we're, let's say, moving furniture, or, you know, having to pick up a mass that's kind of far away from us, but it's not necessarily at the height of the ground. And so we're starting to now get long under load in this odd position and then overcome the mass's resting inertia to be able to pick up the mass and then shift it through a field of space. So another dead shift example, again, we would use this for our more advanced clients, but it's a great progression to get to, because this is how we safeguard our backs over time. If we want to bulletproof our backs, we want to make our backs unbreakable, it's about slowly conditioning our clients to be able to do things like this, because that allows them to bend and flex in any sort of position and in all these different types of loads. And we're going to teach the nervous system how to be smart and to stabilize the body well. And then we're going to condition the tissues at the same time. Okay, so the guidelines for dead strength. If we're working with somebody who is kind of new to the idea of dead strength, we may want to start with putting the mass on an elevated surface. So instead of lifting mass off the ground, maybe we lift it off of a bench or a table. Maybe we start with, instead of having to bend down to the ground, we're going to start with patterns that require less hip hinging, and we would also probably build the prerequisite ability to know how to hinge through the hip versus rounding the spine to initiate a lot of these movements. A lot of the movements at first may be sagittal plane based with known postures, and then even use assisted ways to be able to do so. For the intermediate to advanced client, this is where we can start to use more odd position strength strategies and do more multiplanar versions of the exercises, as well as increase load and volume. Another example we wanted to share with you that is under the umbrella of dead strength is what we call ground to standing. And ground to standing essentially just means the idea of you're on the ground in some sort of posture and you have to get up off the ground. And so a famous example that I think most of us on this webinar know is this, Turkish get up. And so, whether it's, Johnny's own mass that he has to get up off the ground, or if he's carrying an external mass as well, this is a ground to standing technique that provides such an array of benefits, right? Because there is not one muscle in the body that is not contributing to Johnny getting up and down off the ground while stabilizing the kettlebell in front and then overhead. And so we love the idea of ground to standing as a way to improve one's dead strength. And it's a movement-based approach now, because there's every single muscle really is having to contribute to this. And then we need, a good mobility through our joints and tissues as well. So here's a couple more examples of some ground to standing techniques. And we have a whole library of ground to standing techniques that we love to use. Let's say you're working with somebody who's more on the beginning side of their exercise experience. We may use an assisted version where Johnny here is, anchoring himself to a cable that's hooked up to that wall, and then being able to, pull himself up with his upper bodies, perhaps considering the fact that this individual may not have the prerequisite strength right now or mobility to get off the ground with just the hip and leg musculature alone. And so we can consider the idea of using assisted ways to be able to get up and down off the ground. And then over time, we're going to look at strategies that progress our client to be able to get up and down off the ground in a lot of different ways. We're going to use a lot of different positions starting on the ground. So this one we call a seated cross-legged get up. So we've all have started in a position where we sit on the ground cross-legged, and then how do you get up and be strong from this position? You need to have very mobile hips, and you need to have strong hips from this very unique and odd position to be able to get up and down off the ground. So if you wanted to, maybe perhaps we don't do it loaded with a kettlebell at first, and then over time we would load with more mass. It could be a kettlebell, a dumbbell, or other mass-based objects. to progress our client's strength ability to be able to get up and down off the ground effectively. So the guidelines for ground to standing is, for beginners, maybe use assisted ways to get up. We may start in positions where we're going to bring the ground up. So instead of completely on the ground, maybe we have the person seated on a chair, or you can have the hands elevated on a bench and then having to get up from those type of positions. And then we're going to probably stick to just body weight based ground to standing, i.e. no external load. For the intermediate to advanced clients, this is where we can start to add load, add speed, be more dynamic with our movements, use more odd positions, and challenge them in that way as they progress. So overarching dead strength benefits, we're going to improve from a tissue and joint perspective. We're going to improve muscular strength concurrently with joint mobility. It's a big bang for your buck. You're going to enhance mobility through our joints, especially the hips, as well as muscular strength. And we're also going to build tissue tolerance to be able to bend, deep bend in various postures. From a nervous system perspective, we're improving neural sensitivity, and we're going to enhance our ability to stabilize while dynamically moving through various bending postures. So with that said, I'm going to kick it off to Michol to wrap up our 3 different types of strength. He's going to share with us this idea of agile strength.
All right, thanks, Derrick. And what I'd like to do right now is tee up another version of movement strength. And I want to take a few minutes just to set the context and show you a couple of videos. So this idea of agile strength really centers around the ability to generate force and sustain momentum, which is kind of cool because when we think about strength, we think about the ability to generate force. A lot of times it's rooted in the idea that we want to express strength, right? So throwing a ball, running, kicking, all of these things have within it the ability to generate momentum and the ability to what we might deem or describe as a flow. So agile strength is all about momentum based and all about a flow. And when we think about it, a lot of times in our classic understanding of strength, we want to kill momentum, or we think momentum is an aid that is cheating the body's muscular system. And so as we reframe this idea of movement-based strength, one of the things we've got to consider is movement-based strength in and of itself allows for momentum. Momentum is an assister. It's actually helping us. And so it's not muscle-based, it's movement-based, and therefore we need momentum, particularly if we're thinking about agile strength. So that's the concept. And when we think about agile strength and momentum, we think about the nervous system, the muscular system doing 2 things, turning on and turning off. And it's important to teach the muscles and the nervous system to actually down-regulate to allow momentum to flow. That's what makes a golfer hit a golf ball or a thrower throw a ball further, is the ability to get out of the way and not stay in a contracted state, but relax through the golf swing or through the throw or through the run. That is physiology. That is muscle mechanics or neuromuscular mechanics. So we see a classic example right here of a kettlebell swing. Another great example of how momentum can feed an exercise or feed a movement protocol to allow us an opportunity to be a better mover and to express force in a more authentic way. So we've seen that in the gym, and we would describe this particular drill as an agile strength movement-based protocol. Another example, if we go one slide ahead, would be, again, taking a look at, can we actually now facilitate momentum? Can we facilitate an action in more than just the sagittal plane? And here's where I want you to take a look at Derrick's feet. So if he's going to do this in the frontal plane with a little bit of transverse plane expression, so he's moving through the frontal plane and the transverse plane, he's not moving through the transverse plane in his lower back. Because his feet are moving in a very demonstrative way, that allows his knees and his pelvis and effectively his body to turn. And once his pelvis can turn, his lower back simply just follows. So it's not rotating and it's not putting an unnecessary amount of stress to one link of the chain, i.e. the lower back. It's summating because he's turning the feet. And once he turns the feet, he can access now the transverse plane, and he can allow that swing to occur in the transverse plane. Now, once we're ready for that, that helps our golf swing, that helps our dancing, that helps our throwing, that helps our kicking, that helps us live life in a way that teaches the tissues, the nervous system, the muscles to express momentum-based force output. And that is allowing us a better opportunity to be more successful at movement and generating force in a variety of different ways. Another example, if we move one slide ahead, is again taking a look at, again, we can use a variety of different implements. This one we're using a ViPR Pro, and we're doing swings. And in this case, we're doing swings in the frontal plane. And with Dennis right here, what he's doing is he's doing a lot through the hips. He's generating this momentum through the hips. And as a cantilever, the mass is going in the opposite direction. So his goal is to keep momentum alive in this particular pattern. And he wants that swing to be able to be momentum based as he harnesses the rhythm and the timing to coordinate those patterns through the nerves and through the muscles. Another couple of examples, if we go one more slide ahead, is again, we're looking at a swing profile. We're looking at the ability to generate momentum in agile strength. In this case, we're actually moving the body a little bit more. So from a neural complexity position, this is more challenging. So Derrick is actually doing a lateral shuffle, and then that pendulum swing going side to side. He's got to match his body to that implement going side to side in a pendulum perspective. So a couple things happen. Neurologically, more advanced. So this is something that we're going to matriculate towards as a person gets more ability. I will also key in on the fact that metabolically, this is pretty challenging. So if we're ready for this amount of progression in time, the metabolic advantage of this is quite great. So it pushes up our ability to increase metabolic utility, because we're trying to time a lot of things. There's a lot of muscle coordination going on and off. And metabolically, there is a lot going on, which takes a lot of effort. And so our substrates, the fuel that we use, is more immediate in nature. I think one more example that we can use in this idea of movement-based or flows would be just a broad base of examples of what flows actually look like. So it's not as important that we look at all of the particulars, but if we think about movement abilities, what you're going to see here are a variety of different implements in the concept of what we might deem as flows. So if anybody's familiar with animal flow with our good friend Mike Fitch, kettlebell flows, karate or martial arts, these all involve this idea of body flowing mechanics. We can do it with a variety of different implements, with our body weight. If you think about gymnastics in the CrossFit community, the kipping chin up, these are flowing patterns that allow an organization of the system of the body to be more coherent with movement literacy, right? So these are examples of just a variety of different flows that might exist. So the last two slides, one on the guidelines and the other one on benefits. So if we advance to the guidelines and we look at this, for beginners, obviously light load. We want to make small ranges of motion possible. We want to make it easy for the nervous system to coordinate something in an easy way so that they can get intermuscular and intramuscular coordination. Can I turn a muscle on and off, and can I coordinate a series of muscles to get going? Can I initiate the movements through the hips, particularly as I learn this? And as I do, I need to move the feet. And as I go from beginner, obviously uniplanar, let's make it simple. And as I matriculate towards immediate and advanced, I'm going to go towards heavier loads, more, it's still submaximal, but heavier loads, more integrated or complex flowing patterns, maybe fuller ranges of motion where I start to explore my end range. And then, of course, the idea of introducing different planes of motion other than just simply the sagittal plane. And the last slide is really the benefits that I teed up on already. Tissue extensibility through the skin, through the fascial network, and through the muscle. Can I actually get a stretch to shorten? And can I coordinate muscular activity that allows it to turn on and off in a rhythmical timing so that I can coordinate muscular endurance and timing? Because movement is all about on and off, on and off, on and off. Think about if I'm super stiff, like I'm walking on ice for those that live in colder climates, I can't move that well. So this idea of intermuscular coordination is enhanced when I begin to consider agile strength. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to Derrick, and he's going to talk briefly about how we might infuse these three aspects of movement strength into some programming consideration.
Awesome. Thanks, Michol. So yeah, what we want to do now is I imagine that there's enough context built around this idea of movement-based strength. You've got three sub-themes of movement-based strength. We've got odd position, dead strength, and agile strength. How do they live in a program? What does it look like? And so that's what we're going to uncover over this last section. So if we bring out the ACE integrated fitness training model, where does all of this live within this model? Well, it's going to live on the muscular training side of things. And what we would recommend is that it would be used in the load speed phase. So, we would want to spend some time, building function within the body. We want to spend some time developing the basic movement skills that most individuals need. And once that, once our clients have kind of graduated to those stages, then we can start to consider the idea of load speed. And kind of as a decision around load speed, this is where you can start to integrate the idea of movement-based strength training. And so our guidelines around this, not to iterate every single data point that is on here, but really it fits around the idea of, we can do dead strength, odd position strength, or agile strength for different efforts. If we're going to do dead strength, typically we'll do it for maximal or sub-maximal efforts. That means kind of lower rep ranges, more sets. We can have high volumes if we wanted to, and then this is with typically pretty high intensity. Versus odd position and agile strength, we'll focus more on sub-maximal efforts as well as endurance. And so the reason why we don't have maximal efforts under odd position is really the risk versus reward. The last thing we want to do is put our client in a precarious position with 100% intensity and do a maximal lift from that position. There's just not enough reward relative to the risk. And so when we do odd position or agile based strength exercises or strategies, we're always going to program from a sub-maximal perspective. So, at least 3 or 4 reps per set with an intensity that's probably around 90% or less, just because we want to make sure that that client can move well and efficiently with that given type of strategy. And then we can also promote endurance going as high as many 20 reps. But then, of course, the intensity or the total amount of load that you're using will have to come down dramatically to be able to meet the endurance demands of that. So let's walk through a case study to kind of see how this can all be formulated within a program. Let's say you had the opportunity to work with a young couple. They're both 36 years old. They have a young son. And so you can imagine at this stage in their life, they may want less aesthetics. It still may be important to them, but now it's more about, improving function and health. They want to offset a lot of the joints and tissue aches that they tend to experience on a day-to-day, right? It's kind of how we all feel as we get a little older. They want to start to rekindle some of the passion for some sports or physical activity that they've lost over so many years. And so for this type of client, this is where movement-based strength training should be highly considered, at the appropriate stage within their program. So again, after doing some functional-based training, movement-based training, then we can graduate to load/speed phase within the IFT model, and then we can start to integrate some of these strategies that we learned today. And so let's say, as an example, they're both kind of deconditioned or they're new to this idea of movement-based strength training. A program might look something like this. A session might look something like this, where we're going to have specific sections of the workout dedicated to these themes of movement-based strength training. And maybe we'll pick 2 to begin with, focusing on odd position strength at dead strength and using a lot of the strategies that we shared with you today more on the novice side of things. We'll keep the intensity light to moderate, and we'll keep the overall volume low, just to make sure that we're not going to beat up our clients so they're not incredibly sore for days going forward. So we're going to respect kind of the condition state of our client, and then we can always progress from there. For a more intermediate client, this is where we might consider, let's say, all three types of dead strength, movement-based strength categories within one workout. So we might have a section dedicated to odd position, to dead strength, to agile strength. We're going to use perhaps more moderate intensity loads, more volume, more sets and reps as a part of their schemes. Now, the order in which you do odd position, dead strength, or agile strength, what we would recommend is whatever you feel is the most important type of strength that the client needs right now, that is the one that you would start with within the program. So the last two examples, you saw odd position, we started with those drills. You don't have to start with odd position. You can choose whichever one you feel is appropriate for your client and the one that you want to get the most kind of adaptations or the most challenging exercises kind of out of the way at the beginning of the session. For a more advanced client, again, we might consider doing all three. You know, in this case, we're putting dead strength at the very top. Why? Because we're going to go really heavy and, you know, for a decent amount of volume. And so we'll do that first. And then in this case, we're doing odd position and agile strength. That's more endurance based. So the dead strength is more focused on submaximal strength, and then odd position and agile strength, we're focused more on endurance. And so you can see there's a lot more exercises that we selected here, and the intensities or the rep ranges have, you know, been accommodated for this more advanced version. So when we start to program this on a week-to-week basis, if we take a look at, you know, let's say a 7-day protocol, you know, we might consider the idea for somebody who's just kind of starting off, they're going to do movement-based strength, let's say twice a week. And you have a few days in between so they can recover between all that. We can program cardio respiratory training on the in-between days. We can throw in, you know, at-home mobility strategies. So this can be all mapped to an overall enhancing movement capabilities approach. This is an example for somebody who can endure higher volume. So you're having something kind of mapped out, you know, pretty much almost every single day. And so what you're allowed to do, if you wanted to have one day dedicated to dead strength, you can do that. Another day dedicated to odd position strength or agile strength, you can combine them if you wanted to. You can make any sort of combination that you wanted to. And by doing it, kind of having different types of strength on different days, this allows you to introduce more exercises relative to those particular themes. And what's nice, because it's whole body, what we tend to experience, it's kind of like the farmer where you've got chores to do every single day. There is no day off if you've got to build a fence and you got to do it before a storm hits by the end of the week. And so, you know, because it's whole body in nature, what we find is that, you know, as a person builds tolerance, they're actually able to do these types of strategies on a regular basis. And, you know, it's because the whole body is sharing that responsibility to get these particular tasks done. And then we can do a combination. So this is for the client that, you know, still values, let's say, some aesthetic gains, but also would value the idea of doing some more movement-based strategies to enhance strength in both realms. So let's say we did upper body muscle-based strength training, so like chest and back and, you know, bicep curls, and that's all done on day 1. Day 5 would be lower body, where you're doing, you know, legs. And then day 3, that's where we can incorporate our movement-based strength. So we can kind of split things up this way if we wanted to. What we also can do is, you know, consider the fact that with movement-based strength training, a lot of effort is occurring from the hip musculature. It's why our glutes, you know, are supposed to be one of the strongest, if not the strongest muscle on our body. And so when you have the glutes and the adductor complex and all the leg musculature involved with a lot of these whole body integrated exercises, what we can do is program them on, let's say in this case, days 2 and 5, and then we can reserve day 1 and 4 to just strictly upper body based exercises. So that could be to help offset, let's say, somebody who's, you know, wanting to work kind of the whole body, but, you know, certainly wanting to benefit from the idea of doing a more movement-based strength approach. And so lots of different ways in which we might program. A lot of the strategies that we covered today are inferred through a lot of the scientific literature that's out there. in terms of the concept really around the idea of variability. What we find is that to keep our tissues healthy, to keep our nervous system healthy and optimized, to keep our muscles healthy, our joints healthy, we infer along a lot of the research that's pointing on the idea that we need to introduce variable stress to these particular tissues. So we've got scientific literature for you guys to investigate if that's something of interest for you. If you'd like to learn more about these different types of strategies and how we might program for both health and human performance, give us a shout. We're on Instagram at institute_of_motion, or you can find us on Facebook as well at Institute of Motion. At Institute of Motion. So facebook.com at Institute of Motion. And then you can also visit us, of course, on our website, instituteofmotion.com. I'll leave you with this before we get into some questions. We do have a new specialty that we've put together on this idea of applying health and human performance. What we found was super unique to a lot of our point of view around programming is how can we help design a program for somebody that ladders up to both kind of fitness and performance and health? Because a lot of times people engage in fitness and performance, but it tends to come at a cost to our health. We see that with a lot of high-level athletes, right, where they embark in some sort of performance-based endeavors, but only to beat their bodies up kind of long-term. And so when we program design, we're always programming not only to help somebody achieve their particular fitness goal, we also want to ladder up the idea of health along the way. So we created this specialty program to walk a professional through a 12-week virtual program. So we meet virtually through a virtual program that we have. Our focus for level 1 is on the idea of mechanical stress. So a lot of this idea of strength training that we talked about, we will kind of cover in much greater detail. We also cover the idea of mobility training and power training, and how to program those elements for all of our different clients, not just for our high level athletes, but also for the average individual or for our older adult. So we've created a curriculum to where you're going to be able to receive 10 hours of CECs with ACE as a result of going through this program. And we're also going to give you a tangible tool called our program builder. This program builder allows you to create systematic programs for your clients that you can deliver to your clients. And so through this process, not only are you learning, education around the idea of health and human performance, you're going to envelop a whole new business opportunity for yourself to be able to not just deliver sessions for your clients, but imagine now delivering comprehensive programs for your client that are mapped out over the course of, let's say, 30 days, and you deliver to them that program, and they can start to do that with you helping them virtually. And so we explore all of that in our level 1 curriculum. So with that being said, before we get into the questions, I just want to say, thank you so much, on behalf of IOM, Michol, really appreciate you guys taking the time to hang out with us today to geek out on this topic of movement-based strength.
Thanks, Derrick, very much. That was a lot of great information. And as you can see on your slide, just like Derrick was mentioning, the Institute of Motion program that they have coming up, you should see a link for that in your chat box right now. But also with ACE, if you want to continue your education in this area of movement-based strength training, we have a few courses that you might be interested in. So you can check those out on the American Council on Exercise website. We will be taking just a couple of live questions here. We have just a few minutes left. So if you type your live question in, we'll get to that in just a moment. And as a reminder, you can earn continuing education through ACE using our CEC club as well. And we'll talk about that here shortly too. So let's forward through a couple of slides and get to our questions so that we can talk to Derrick and Michol. I'll bring you guys both back in. Welcome back. Thank you both for being with us today for this live presentation. I'm going to just jump right in. We have just a couple moments left here. One of the kind of biggest questions that I'm seeing come through, a big theme in the questions, is can we and how do we apply this type of training to senior clients, to our active aging populations? So maybe Michol, you want to start off and let us know what you think.
You got it. So that's such a great question, because in a lot of cases, we think about some of these premises being to a certain degree more advanced. And by advanced, we mean it challenges the tissues in different ways. It challenges the nervous system in different ways. And what it does also do is challenge this idea of movement literacy. Like, we need to be able to move to be able to do it. Having said all that, we still need the ability to express movement-based outcomes at any age. And so applying this to a variety of different demographics, right? So age groups is going to be really important. So if I'm thinking about, let's say driving this towards the older population, what I want to do is make the environment safe for them to be able to execute the drill and for them to make mistakes. And the environment is set up so that those mistakes are not egregious to the system. So let me give an example. So let's say I have got a concern for a client that is a senior population, and my fear is that they might fall or they might hurt themselves. Can I create a situation where the environment takes that away? And one of them, it might be in water. So if I have a person do a lunge sequence and they're a senior population that has access to a pool, and they're standing up in a pool, and that pool is up to about waist height in water, then they can self-organize the task without fear of falling, because if they fall in water. So what we generally do is we say, how can we regress the strategies to make it safe? And that could be environment, that could be sitting in a chair, that could be less range of motion, that could be no external load. And so what we do is we regress the complexity, we regress the position. So it may not be multiplanar, it may be single plane. It may not be a large reach or at an end range that is far away from the body. It may be close to the body. It may be closer to the ground. So instead of standing, I'm kneeling. Instead of standing, I'm sitting. Instead of standing, I'm standing in water. Instead of standing, I'm standing hanging on to something that's not going to move, right? It could be a chair, it could be a squat rack. So I've got an external frame of reference that makes it safe for me as I take one arm and I reach away, but that other arm is hanging on to something that's not going to move. So I manipulate the environment so that it's safe, and then I overlay the conditions of movement upon that safe environment. And as I do that, I introduce inputs into the older individual's nervous system, their tissues, their joints, so that they can accommodate an adaptation over time that improves their ability to move and to express force. And if I can do that, even in subtle ways, I might increase my capacity as an older person to be able to be movement strong. And what that affords me is outcomes of living my life a whole lot better. So the question is a great question. And what we do is we just typically reduce or regress our thinking strategies to produce a safe environment and to make sure that the motor complexity and the weight and the acute variables are adjusted to the beginner level. And then it's a response over time that leads to an adaptation.
Great. Derrick, anything you want to add there?
No, I mean, I think as Michol is alluding to, we could probably unpack that question and create an entire course dedicated to it. It's a very relevant question because many of us do work with the older adult. We have to have strategies in play to be able to regress and, be able to know where to start with those individuals and how to progress them accordingly. So, great question. And to answer it briefly, it's yes, we can definitely use it for the older adult, but we're going to have to be, really, considering a lot of things in terms of how we would deliver it for them.
Great. So modification may be necessary. And I imagine too that based on this type of movement and maybe the new movement patterns for this population, there's probably some cognitive benefits there too as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jackie. Yeah, I mean, think about any new strategy or new movement you have to do. Think about how the nervous system, the brain, has to hardwire, a new neural network, right, to be able to figure out how to stabilize the body, how to locomote the body to be able to accomplish these given tasks. So there's neurogenesis, neuroplasticity, all these great brain benefits that we get from promoting and challenging our clients with new strategies that are, whole body integrated.
Great, perfect. Yeah, so I feel like you said, Michol and Derrick, that we could probably apply all of that information to probably any special population, and as long as we're taking those clients' needs in mind, we can make this work. So this was a lot of great information. Thank you both so much. We are going to send everybody over if they have some questions that they would like to continue to ask to both Michol and Derrick from the Institute of Motion. Go ahead and go on over to the ACE Fitness Facebook page. We have a chat that is open right now. You can type your question in there, and these guys will be getting back to you over the next few days. You can continue the conversation there with them. So thank you both very much. We'll just close out the webinar here with a few more slides. Remember to connect with the American Council on Exercise in a variety of ways. We look forward to hearing from you about anything that you want to talk about related to health and fitness. Let us know what you thought about today's live webinar. Once again, thank you all for joining us. Derrick and Michol, if you want to pop back in, if you're there, we'll say goodbye to you. Thanks again for joining us today.
That was great. Thank you so much.
A big thanks to you, Jackie, and the team, just for allowing us an opportunity to share some information, and everybody, all the fitness professionals that are on. One quick thing, I know that during this challenging time, there's a lot of things that folks are facing, and so I just want to extend a heartfelt hope that you guys are all safe, that loved ones are safe during this time, and that, I'm sure as a community, we're all thinking about each other. So just with that, just realizing what's important and acknowledging that too. So appreciate your having us on, Jackie.
Appreciate you guys. Thanks very much. We'll talk to you soon. Everybody, thanks for joining us today. Now let's get people moving.